Hi everybody, I thought I'd give you all an update on my Baileigh BS-127P and tell you guys why I decided to keep it. So if you guys have seen my earlier videos on the BS-127P, you'll see some sloppiness in the pivot for the miter adjustment that was actually caused by a fracture in the pivot mount here on the miter adjustment mechanism. I originally bought the saw from Summit and was going to return the saw to Summit, but in the end went directly back to Baileigh to work with their customer service there to inform them of the problem, and they were actually really good about shipping out a replacement and making sure that it didn't have any of the original issues. So you can see the miter adjustment actually works smoothly now, and when you lock it down there is no slop in the pivot mechanism here as there was previously. So in the end, I'm pretty pleased with the customer service Baileigh provided, and that's part of the reason I kept it. But the other reason is I started looking at the other saws out there, the Grizzly, the Trajan. None of those actually have this feature, which is the shut-off switch. So this is an end-of-cut shut-off switch. So this is really nice for productivity because I can set up a saw cut and let it run and let it cut through the material, and it'll shut off by itself while I go cut something else on the chop saw or something like that. Now there are some idiosyncrasies about how this works, or maybe not idiosyncrasies, it's just maybe not what I would initially expect. So there's all kinds of switches on this thing. There's a switch here that switches between the manual trigger and running kind of steady state mode. So if you plug the saw in, it turns on. And so if the switch is in the up position, that runs the saw in sort of an automatic mode. If the switch is in the down position, you use the trigger here, and you always have to hit the green button to energize the saw, and then you can turn the trigger on. Of course, you can't see my hand in the camera. Let me move the tripod back a little bit. Sorry, YouTube, I'm pretty amateur. So here you go. Now you can hit the trigger here. The cutoff switch still works in the manual mode, but every time you want to start a cut again, if I lift the saw up, I can't just start the cut again. I actually have to go hit the green button again to energize the saw. So just a little something to getting used to. And then here, once you're in automatic mode again, hit the green button. Start the cut. You want to start a new cut? Hit the green button again. There's an EMO switch there. I'm not sure what value actually that provides when you got a shut off button right next to it. So anyway, I'm sure it's some ISO safety certification requirement that they have to have. Anyway, onto the saw setup. The saw actually seems to cut pretty precisely. The saw runs pretty quietly and runs smoothly. It's got a very low speed up to pretty high speed, so the variable speed function works pretty nicely. There's this lockdown mechanism here. If you need to pick up the saw, you can pick it up by the heavy part of the saw. It will not go vertical if you wanted to, say, put a platen here to use it as a vertical bandsaw. But it looks like you could remove a screw over here that limits the upstroke. I haven't tried that yet. Maybe that'll be another video if I can get it to move into a vertical mode with a few hacks and make a platen for it. That would be nice to be able to set it up as a vertical. It does have two stops, so it has a stop at 60 degrees and a stop at 0 degrees. It did not come set up particularly well at the factory, so it did take some fine tuning to actually get it set up to cut the 60 and the 0 accurately, but now that it's set up, it actually repeats quite nicely. One trick, it does have these kind of snail adjusters here for fine-tuning the stops. They're a little finicky, but if you actually get an adjustable wrench on here, you can actually use this as a reaction force to actually hold the snail in place as you tighten it, and kind of move it around to fine-tune the stops as you're tightening it. It works pretty well. I don't know that I do a lot of cuts at 60 degrees, and I'm actually quite sure I don't do a lot of cuts at 60 degrees. It would have been probably nicer to have the option to be able to move that snail to a 45 degree location, so you could easily switch between 0 and 45, because I do a lot more 45 cuts than 60 cuts. But in the end, you know, I'm used to setting up, you know, using a precision square or precision 45 to set up my cuts anyway. Not a huge detractor, but for most of us, 45s are probably more useful. You do have to adjust the angle of the saw blade here to get it to cut perpendicular nicely, and you do that by actually loosening these two screws here and twisting around this bearing. And it actually takes a fair bit of twist to get this guy to cut straight. Now this side does not have any adjustment mechanism, so in the end it seems to work well. I am getting, you know, reasonably perpendicular cuts on both sides, but I'm not sure why there is so much twist in this side. Maybe this one is just machined precisely enough that you don't need to adjust it. But anyway, all is good. It does seem to cut perpendicular. There's an adjustment here. This allows you to move your saw guide. If you're cutting smaller material, move your saw guide closer to your cut or to your part, so that it does cut more perpendicular. It moves reasonably well. It's, you know, the knobs are plastic. It doesn't seem to be the highest quality hardware out there. You probably are going to have to be careful not to abuse those guys and potentially break them. But they, you know, it is a Taiwan saw. It's, you know, it is, you know, a $500 saw. It's not a particularly high buck piece of equipment. The stop here, pretty cheesy. If you say you want to cut a piece, if you had to cut 1-inch pieces or something like that, if you're cutting strip stock to weld on the end of some square tubing or something like that, actually the stop here runs into the base before you get there. You could probably put a longer screw in here or something like that, but overall, just this stop mechanism is pretty ghetto, I think. It's you know, it doesn't even have like a hand nut here that you could tighten and loosen this thing. You actually have to get a wrench on it. Probably what I'll do is see if I can adapt a mill stop or some dial indicator mounts or something like that to do something a little bit more precise and a little nicer to use, other than this thing here. This shaft here that the stop rides on, it's actually already getting some rust on it. I can tell rust is going to be an issue with this part. I live in a pretty dry climate. It's not something I'm used to having to. There's certain things in my shop that I know will rust. Most other things don't rust in my climate, but I can tell this is going to be one of the ones that does rust. There is one little minor quality issue that's left on the cover on the back side. This fold here on the back side, I'll show you guys a close-up of it, isn't fitted particularly well, but the rest of the cover actually was formed much better. So really the only gripe I really have with the saw is really kind of the stops. The quality of the hardware here, not so good, and the quality of the forming on the back side here, not so good either. So here's the only remaining quality issue I'm seeing, is kind of the fit of this panel here and the forming of it. You can see that it's kind of deformed here where the thing's been forced on, even though this bend is actually not located in the correct place on the part. And you can see it kind of damages the finish over here and just sort of pooches out uncomfortably. just because it doesn't fit right. But the rest of the covers actually formed pretty well. The previous one was not formed well here. It was kind of pooching out over here and over here on this side as well. But this one actually fits. I'll say it fits Taiwan well. But in the end, I'm actually pretty pleased with the saw. I really like the automatic shut-off feature that most of the other saws don't have. Of course, I don't know that it's actually worth the $200 premium to put a switch on here. They're making good margins on that, I'll tell you that. But if you look at the Grizzly saw that looks functionally identical to this is $300. I think there's a couple others out there that are in that price range as well, but again, none of them have this shut off switch. In terms of productivity, it's an enhancement for me that's worth it, and it's a feature that differentiates the Baileigh from the other saws in this price range. Anyway, I think I covered all the points I wanted to cover. Like I said, in the end, I'm pretty pleased with it. The vise works nicely. It does cut nice and square. It does seem to run smoothly and quietly. It does functionally. I'm actually quite happy with it at this point. So I'll be hanging on to it. Thanks to the guys at Baileigh for taking good care of me in terms of the quality department. I think they may have some QC issues I need to keep a little tighter control of on the product going out the door. But everybody lets one slip once in a while, so I'm not going to be overly judgmental on that. Anyway, hope you guys have a good day. Hope this was useful for you guys that are out there looking for a horizontal bandsaw. If I do something in the future with a platen and converting it to vertical, I'll be sure to post it to YouTube and share it with you guys. All right.